Neuropsychology of engagement. This is an audio perspective. So let's just talk about terminology. So what is neuropsychology? So basically, it's psychological observations on behavior, emotion, and cognition. Cognition is just our thoughts. Combined with neurological observations of the brain and the nervous system. So why? Why examine the neuropsychology of engagement? I think the thinking is to apply a more data-driven, empirical approach to how the brain processes auditory information. And so, you say, whoa, but people just turn the sound off. Come on, right? Well, Touch Arcade in 2013 did a study that found that 73% of mobile gamers in the US play with sound on, 90% in China and Korea, 58% in UK. Those results actually surprised a lot of people, and it was good for me to hear. So, but we gather data, we gather analytics. Are general analytics sufficient? Well, we are actually seeing the emergence of specific companies that specialize in audio analytics, companies like Veritonic, where they use a combination of machine learning and audience-based scoring system, and these results are plotted across multiple dimensions that are rated, and lots of emotional responses, get some good data. I think in the future, this data will become more quantifiable. It's difficult right now as it's more subjective and it's kind of in this gray matter, right? How do we get at it? So, bad news first. We don't have specific research, obviously, on music and engagement in games. But the good news is we can apply the research that we do have, and we can apply that towards what I would just call sort of best standards and practices. So intuition and experience. The thing is, much of what we'll discuss in this talk, composers, we do this intuitively. But I really believe that there's value in understanding how and why we do it, become more conscious of the mechanisms, and apply it more systematically. So the assumption of this talk is that when we understand how the brain processes music, specifically in the areas of attention, pleasure, and we leverage that in the overall execution of the music, all aspects of the music, and I'll get into that a little bit more later, then we'll see an increase in engagement and retention. That's the assumption. And I heard Monty from Zynga on Tuesday talking about sort of the expense of user acquisition and sort of the hit with cost per install, and that moving away from UA and trying to really focus on engagement and retention. So now more than ever, this is important, especially when you have a large pool of users. Even fractional increases in your engagement, it's a big deal. We know that audio changes things. Casino slots. We have recent study, 2013, in the Journal of Gambling, showed that players significantly overestimate the number of wins when they play with the sound on as compared to playing the slot with the sound off. This is both by self-report and by a measure of heart rate deceleration after a win. You can see the graph there as their overestimated wins. So how is music processed in the brain? So there's two general ways. There's first top-down, where the brain is active first. So we think of the brain active first means thoughts. And lots of things that we do in the course of our day are top-down. We have thoughts, this leads to an emotion, and then there's a behavioral or a body response. But music, generally speaking, with some exceptions, but music is bottom-up. It happens in the body first. When we experience that chills or goosebumps when we hear music, that's starting in the body. We don't say to ourselves, oh, that's really cool, and get the goosebumps, right? We get the goosebumps first. And the importance here is to remember that when the brain processes audio, it's in the body first. Because we think of games, mobile games, casual games, any game really other than like maybe a VR experience as fairly sedentary. But it happens in the body. And bottom up is body emotion, and then thoughts last. We have a wealth of research on music and emotion. I'm sure many of you have heard these studies. Adults can reliably assign an emotion to a piece of music within just a matter of seconds. By 6 years old, children can do this too. And we have judgments of, in this case, let's say Western musical expressiveness, major scales, faster tempos are often assigned more positive emotions, minor scales, slower tempos assign more negative emotions. We don't really know why this is, but the thought may be that there's a physical bearing or movement of people in different emotional states. So for example, someone who's old or sick might move in a way that mirrors a slow tempo, and somebody who's young or healthy might actually be then reflected in a musical expressiveness as a faster tempo. So people can reliably assign an emotion to a piece of music, but just by saying like, oh, well, that music is sad, doesn't actually mean that they're experiencing the emotion. So labeling an emotion is not the same thing as experiencing it. And in this talk, that's what we're really going to focus on, is when you're actually experiencing that emotional response. So we're going to focus on the salient components of music, in particular, that increase attention and produce a strong or positive emotional engagement. You can focus on producing a negative emotional engagement if that's what you want. But for the purposes of this talk, we'll focus on positive. So the first salient aspect is familiarity. The brain absolutely loves familiarity in music. Subjects prefer music that they've heard before versus novel music. There's a fascinating study that was done in 2001 that infant studies actually confirm that 1-year-olds prefer music that they've heard in the womb. And this actually was very contradictory to our understanding of memory formation. We just didn't think that that was possible at that age. So how does the brain actually respond to familiarity? So usually these studies focus on a self-report, right? So that's just the subject sort of telling the examiner, you know, what they think, what they feel, and that's collected as data. And then some kind of other more objective measure. In this case, many of the studies use fMRI, functional magnetic resonance. That's basically scanning the brain for areas of blood flow, because the areas of the brain that are more active have more blood supply going to them. And positron emissions tomography, which is similar, but you put a radioactive isotope on something like glucose, because areas of the brain that are active eat more glucose, it likes sugar. And then we can have more of a scan. So here's our friendly neurotransmitter friend, dopamine, right? This plays a very important role in attention, memory, mood, learning, sleep, movement, anticipatory pleasure. Very deeply connected to reward-motivated behavior. Increases in response to food, sex, connected to addictive behavior if the reinforcement is sufficiently high. When we eat and we get an increase in dopamine, when we're full, the dopamine goes down. So you have problems when the dopamine levels are continually running high. And even running a yellow light, you're going to get a little hit, right, in an area of the brain called the ventral striatum. Woohoo, you know, right? So here it is, area of the brain, the ventral striatum. And studies of familiarity in music have shown that this area of the brain is connected to dopaminergic pathways. So there is an increase in dopamine in this area of the brain when people are experiencing familiarity in music and when they're experiencing a peak emotional response to music. So familiarity mediates the relationship between emotional arousal and pleasure. And you might have heard people say, oh, well, you know, listen to music because it increases your dopamine. That's actually not true. It's familiar music, familiar content. And other studies use electrodermal activity, which you also might have heard as galvanic skin response. So that's just another objective measure of emotional arousal. So that's familiarity. Okay, so even Schoenberg himself had to admit intelligibility in music seems impossible without repetition, right? So repetition is the next sort of salient quality of music that we'll investigate. The brain also loves repetition. And broadly speaking, repetition is the presence of same or similar material within a musical piece. We're not talking about a 4-bar loop, okay? So think like modern pop structure. You've got repetition because of the verses, the choruses, or some form of theme and variation. This is what I mean by repetition. And studies on repetition in music have found that there's a couple different processes going on. There's a process pleasure as the unfolding of the musical surface happens. And then this is really the most interesting part, is there's the creation pleasure. And that's where the listener starts to generate novel, changing experiences by connecting different time points in their memory. And the importance here, again, is that the musical repetitions that they found, Margulis in 2014, push processing down from the more cognitive frontal cortex and into the more motor automatic basal ganglia, very old part of our brain. And we think about the basal ganglia and movement. We think about when you hear some piece of music and it just compels you to move, to dance. It also is the part that really kind of gets us to start tapping our toes, right? So this is related to hooks and earworms. How do they work? Well, if a musical passage is repeated and encoded sufficiently, the listener starts to execute this sequence imaginatively. And I like this quote: "Music in these cases can seem to play the person." The next salient aspect is anticipation. This has been highly studied by David Huron in particular. Anticipation is highly rooted in evolutionary psychology, necessary for survival, right? It also happens to be heavily time-based. This is why metric meter and even subbeats and strong and weak beats, we have an anticipatory reaction to that. We found that optimal tempos between 85 and 120 with a mean preferred tempo of 106 beats per minute. This is also highly connected to the limbic system and, again, to dopaminergic pathways. So when you think, again, of a lot of what we're hearing here is the body. You know, we think of like music as being processed up here, you know. Huron has a model that he calls the ITPRA, where the stages of anticipation are imagination, tension, prediction, response, and appraisal. And then there becomes a vicarious pleasure response as though the outcome had already happened. So this is happening when we listen to music, and the anticipatory sort of fabric kind of unfolds. So I'm going to go back to this slide, because like I said earlier, composers do a lot of this intuitively. But there's some value in understanding how and why, and there's value in perhaps applying it more systematically. So how do we apply this research? Well, the cool thing is the sky's the limit. I mean, as developers and creatives, you will find ways to apply this research in ways that I never would think of. I know that at Lee and Ortega, I can talk a little bit about how we think about this, and we think strongly about these concepts of familiarity, repetition, and anticipation. Audio brand your franchise. Just, you know, really have focus on very strong melodic, thematic melodies and motifs. Audio brand your company, your division. And it's interesting that I work for a lot of mobile developers where you start their game and you see their logo, but there's no sound. And yet we know that this is highly effective with, you know, when you wish upon a star at Disney, or the PlayStation logo, or Intel, Ubisoft. So think strategically about creating anchor points at when you're going to have a restatement of thematic material to trigger that familiarity, and what are the times that you're going to leave space for the anticipation part, especially during wins and payoffs. And it gives your audio content legs. So if you generate strong thematic material, then you can extend that and use that material to sort of cross-platform to others, or sort of related franchises. And so I think that it's a way of actually thinking about it and being more conscious of applying this research systematically, I think will be the first step. And then we'll see, I think, more research come out that's more specific to the game industry. But this is what we have right now. And it's fun to think about, and, you know, I encourage all of you to think about the ways that you would apply it too. And that's it.
Awesome, great stuff. Any questions?
Hi.
Hi. So I had a question, like, when it comes to like repetition in like a game music, and like, let's say like you're playing a game and it's repeating over and over because we have to have it on a loop. Is there like a certain point where that becomes too repetitive for people and they start turning stuff off? Do you know like what the good middle ground is for that?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that what I didn't have time to go into is when we talk about repetition, really I think that what we're talking about, what the brain really likes is an optimal balance between familiarity and novelty. That's why when we think about, theme and variation, or even modern pop structure, that you're getting a restatement of the musical material, but you're getting it a little bit differently. And that's what the brain loves. And so part of the problem with a loop that's too short is that it's exactly the same. And that's why I was trying to make the distinction between repetition and familiarity. That's different because familiarity is like, oh, I've heard that song before. But repetition in that case is the same musical material, and we do fatigue of that. So that absolutely is not optimal. And I think what's a great question is I don't know if there's research to say where is that threshold. I mean, we have arbitrary thinking about that, right? A 1-minute loop. But I don't think it's based on anything that I'm aware of. So I think that's actually a really good question. I want to look into it.
Mine's less of a question and more of a statement. I think that the time format that you have kind of limits what you can dive into, but I would have loved to have this for an hour and have you give specific examples of what you think did this and what did not.
I wouldn't.
I would love it.
No, I'm just kidding.
Right. I would love it.
No, I'm just kidding.
But anyway, I appreciate the introduction to the subject. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the thinking is to expand the talk and then to have you give it.
Awesome.
Hi, I came in much later, but it was very interesting. On the hooks and the earworms slide, do you think it's not just the phrasing or the portion of the music that needs to be encoded properly, but do you feel the frequency content also makes a difference? And as an extension, would it make a difference, or have you found any difference depending on how the sound is played back? So if it's coming out from tinny speakers versus headphones, there's specific hooks which work for the medium that it is played for.
Yeah, it probably does. I mean, just the research in that area is so deep and extensive, there just wasn't any way for me to touch upon that. But yeah, people have investigated that, and so mine is more of a simplification. But yes, I think that things like frequency response, timbre, a lot of qualities do make a difference.
Well, great stuff, David. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.